piece of candy.
This is where the story begins. A family of 4 purchases a house in a quaint little town. It's not a terrible place, but the price they get it for raises some eyebrows. It's that peculiar kind of cheap, the sort that raises a huge red flag over the entire neighborhood. But the family isn't bothered by it. They take what they can get. It doesn't take long for things to take a turn for the worse. The father can't sleep. The mother is overwhelmed with unexplained stress, and the children start hearing strange voices emanating from beneath the house. They share their concerns with their parents. They wouldn't keep something like that to themselves, right? However, every time the parents investigate, they find nothing and see nothing. They chalk it up to nerves, and life carries on. The eerie whispers under the house are disregarded until one day, those voices become more insistent, urging the younger brother to do something terrible to his older sister. Panic ensues. Don't worry about the children, they come out of the situation unharmed. The sister manages to fend off her brother, the mother intervenes, and the father promptly moves the family out of the house. As far as I know, they moved on with their lives. But the real cause for concern is those mysterious voices. They send experts to investigate the property, hoping to find something paranormal. And it turns out there were indeed strange sounds emanating from under the house, or to be more precise, noises that could be mistaken for voices, especially when filtered through the vivid imagination of a child. After some time, they identify the source of the strange sounds. And it's not ghosts, as you might expect. It's insects. And that's where our story comes into play. I arrived a couple of days after Dr. Freeman. He didn't talk much initially, but he had a grin on his face as if he'd won the lottery. I couldn't blame him. Many insects communicate through sounds, usually as simple as rubbing their wings together or something similar. But these creatures were unique, unlike anything seen before. We were the first to study them. The doctor gave me a straightforward task. Look and listen. So that's precisely what I did. You wouldn't believe these creatures. They resembled a nightmare version of cicadas. Their movements defied logic, as if they were animated by someone with no understanding of anatomy. However, it worked. They made noise. These creatures had 2 modes, a whisper and a scream. The whisper was more common, which isn't surprising, considering that parents could never hear them properly. Credit to the kids, though. It did sound almost like a voice, perhaps multiple voices, making it challenging to pinpoint their location unless I observed the bugs directly. Sometimes I even thought one of them had escaped. Then there's the scream, and that was something entirely different. It felt like it originated inside my own head, rendering me almost immobile when I heard it. I assumed it was some sort of defense mechanism because I couldn't think of any other purpose for it. I spent days observing these bugs. Dr. Freeman was busy doing his own experiments, working relentlessly. I didn't think he slept, and his hygiene was questionable. One day I asked if he was taking the bugs away for breeding or some other purpose. He simply said, "They're coming." He didn't offer any further explanation, no matter how much I prodded him. It was just, "They're coming." The following day, he brought in some mice. This was the first experiment he had me observe, and I wish I had left right then and there. Instead, I watched as Dr. Freeman gave one of the mice to the bugs. I had witnessed fear before, in people and animals. However, this was an entirely different level of fear, something that shouldn't even exist. I was amazed the mouse didn't simply die from shock, but it seemed as though it wasn't permitted to do so. The bugs surrounded the mouse, whispering and watching as it panicked, ran in circles, clawed at the glass, and did everything possible to escape. Then one bug stepped forward and screamed. The mouse froze, the fear still evident, but it couldn't move. The bug crawled onto the mouse, attached itself, and I couldn't tell how much time passed. It felt like an eternity. Eventually, the bug managed to burrow deep inside the mouse's back, reducing itself to a mere lump. And then the mouse began to move. That's when I couldn't bear to watch anymore and noticed Dr. Freeman's reaction. He was smiling, even proud. He watched the mouse bug stumble around and produce an odd imitation of the bug's usual whisper. "It's mimicry," he said. I could only muster, "It doesn't sound like a mouse." Dr. Freeman turned to me and shook his head. "She's still young. She'll learn." And learn she did. This was the realm of mad science. And as irrational as it might seem now, I felt the need to see it through, at least through observation. I didn't want to witness more of what happened to that mouse, though. I asked the doctor not to offer more mice to the bugs, and he simply said, "Won't need to." Instead, I aimed to comprehend these enigmatic creatures. It took a day for the mouse bug's whisper to evolve into a squeak, a few hours for the other mice to accept her, and by the next day, all the mice except one had their own little lumps. No more mice were removed from the cage, and no bugs were introduced. Dr. Freeman even allowed me to review the camera footage to confirm this. It was the mouse bug itself that had done something to the others, using them to reproduce. But why did they leave one mouse alone? The doctor wouldn't offer a theory. I pressed him for an answer, but he was absorbed in the whispers of the bugs. He asked if I had figured out what they were saying. I replied, "They're not saying anything. You'll learn." Soon, people from the community started reaching out, but not to both of us, just to me. I had kept to myself since my arrival, assuming Dr. Freeman did the same. We were guests, focused on our work. Or so I thought. They wanted to discuss Dr. Freeman. They found him strange and no longer felt comfortable with him in their town. One particular older man who had lived in the town his entire life claimed to have driven past the abandoned house and spotted Dr. Freeman there, muttering to the ground, laughing, then muttering again. He tried to approach and inquire if everything was okay. According to him, Dr. Freeman had looked at him with a malevolent, calculated expression and then sprinted into the woods. Strangely, that incident had occurred days before the old man reached out. I had seen Dr. Freeman that very morning, and he appeared, if not entirely normal, then at least like his usual self. I headed to the lab, intending to suggest that Dr. Freeman needed some time off, as he seemed to be losing his grip on reality. I felt a responsibility, perhaps because I had allowed this to continue for so long, and I needed to get him away from those bugs. But Dr. Freeman wasn't in the lab, so I did what I thought was best. I reviewed the security camera footage, not just from that day, but from the beginning, every moment when I wasn't around. On day 1, before my arrival, he conversed with the bugs. On day 2, he expelled something from his mouth, and they devoured it. On day 3, he allowed a few bugs to crawl all over him, even his mouth, nose, and eyes, exaggerating facial expressions all the while. On day 4, I noticed him peering inside through the window, watching me when I believed I was alone. And it went on like this. I watched every moment, considering the implications of the little mouse bug, and I realized something. I had never interacted with Dr. Freeman at all. I hadn't worked with him or even met him. The last clip I observed, Dr. Freeman sat alone in the middle of the room shortly after I had left. The bugs and mice crawled all over him. He looked at the camera, and it was as though he knew. He knew I had figured it out. They were responsible for everything. I did precisely what that family of 4 had done. I got out of there. Not long afterward, I heard from the police. They had discovered Dr. Freeman's lifeless body in the lab with no sign of bugs or mice. They informed me they had witness statements confirming they had seen him well after his estimated time of death and asked if I could make any sense of it. I recounted everything I've just shared with you. After a long silence that made me think the call had disconnected, they uttered the same phrase I'd heard from Dr. Freeman when I believed he was Dr. Freeman, and when I assumed I was the one doing the observing. "They're coming,"